Um, Ever since I could express myself, I always knew that I was a girl, and I always referred to myself as a girl, and I played with girl things, and it was just who I was inside.
And Mom, did you go with that from the beginning, or were you resistant or trying to redirect?
I went with it. She was such a lovely baby, so happy. And if she said she wanted to play with something girly, I didn't have a problem with that. As she entered the twos, though, she would say to me, "Mommy, I'm a girl. There's a mistake." I'd say, "Good boy." She'd say, "No, good girl." And I just didn't want her to feel bad about herself. So I'm like, okay, whatever, you know, you're a girl, fine. I thought it would pass, but as months went by, I realized this was getting stronger. And I had a DSM-4 at home and looked in it, and there is a diagnosis for gender identity disorder in children. And she hit 5 out of the 5 other markers for it. So by age 3, I had a pretty good idea
what you were dealing with. Did that prompt you then to seek medical help, or you just rolled with it further?
Right, yeah, at that time. I went and sought medical help at that time. Actually, the pediatrician around 2.5, 3 said, "You know what, I think you have a problem. You might want to seek a specialist," and I did. And they confirmed what I had diagnosed at home. And at that time, you know, we were devastated. You know, it's not, you don't want to hear your child has any disorder. But since then, we've been trying to make the best of it and just support her and let her guide us.
Johanna, Dr. Olson, you deal with this all the time.
Yes.
And so this is not an uncommon story for you to hear what we're calling gender identity disorder of childhood.
That's correct.
Okay. But there's confusing and conflicted language all around this disorder, isn't there?
Yes,
in fact,
there
we
is.
call it a disorder even is something that people argue about. Tell me where the medical community is now about this.
I think the medical community is all over the place. I think it's really difficult. It's not something you're taught about in medical school. It's not something you're taught about.
By the way, not taught about in medical school. Exactly right. I don't think anyone's taught about it really specific. You hear about it a little bit in adults, but you don't hear about it in children.
That's correct. And I think just the idea that people are transitioning or social transitioning, which is changing your hair, your clothes, maybe your name and maybe your pronouns in childhood, is a really rare and new phenomenon.
Good, bad?
Depends who you ask. I personally think there are children who are suffering so much and have so much social dysfunction that they drive a social transition themselves.
And so should Jazz be encouraged to continue the way she's doing it? Is this a healthy way to approach this problem? Well, and again, I choke on the word problem and disorder because the kid doesn't seem to be suffering.
That's
right?
correct.
Doesn't there need to be some suffering associated with the disorder, right?
I think that's why people get disturbed that it's in the DSM at all. It's called a disorder, but it really is around the dysphoria that exists when you are forced to live in the role that doesn't match your internal identity.
Mom, is this your understanding of how things work now? Because again, I've heard you use some terminology there that you seem very familiar with. Has the medical community helped you in this regard?
I've been very fortunate. I've landed in the hands of wonderful professionals. In fact, you were talking about medical school earlier, and our therapist actually teaches undergrad, graduate, and medical students. And Jazz and I have gone to speak to the medical students. So in our area, there is some talk about it, and they're hearing about it, and they didn't know. And we teach them, and they ask us questions. So.
As great as that is, I bet it is, sorry to interrupt you, but I bet it's a small group of four students in a clinical rotation where the attending happens to be interested in this. So out of the tens of thousands of medical students, 3 or 4 are exposed to this. But it's good, better than none, right?
That's right.
Now, as Jazz enters puberty, medical science, of course, will be the key to this journey. Here's another clip from I Am Jazz, A Family in Transition, airing this Sunday on the OWN network.
So the exam basically shows that she's in puberty. And she's at a Tanner stage 2. You're not going to see a lot of the physical changes until at least 6 months to a year from now, but we have the option of either allowing those changes to happen and see if there's any changes as far as does she want to pursue that or not, or we can decide we don't want to have it happen and we can stop it with some of the treatments that we talked last year. Probably within the next 6 months, you're going to have to make the decision of to stop it or if you want to let it go a little bit longer.
Okay. Like this minute? Doesn't work like that.
We'll talk about it. So, Dr. Olson, in order to complete this transition, there's a lot of biological interventions that are going to have to be made. Can you take us going forward what Jazz may be looking at?
So I think with someone as young as Jazz who's just starting puberty, what we would do for her is suppress her puberty. So we would want her to
Suppress her testosterone part of the puberty.
That's correct.
So suppress her testes.
That's right.
Okay.
We don't want her to develop any male secondary sexual characteristics. that
Would you
will-
supplement her with estrogens and
Not
female
right
hormones?
now. Not right now.
At what point would you do that?
It's an interesting question. It doesn't have a great answer. There are recommendations, but those recommendations come from very, very limited research and very limited studies.
Is there a risk to do that?
There are risks to any medications.
Yeah.
Certainly, we talk about risks with patients, but in cases like this, it's really important that actually these medications are relatively safe, especially when you compare to the lifetime that people will have if they don't do a hormonal transition.
Fair enough. Jazz, what are you planning to do?
I hope I take hormones because I really don't want to face male puberty because ever since I was very young, I've had nightmares about growing beards and mustaches, so I'm hoping I don't have to face male puberty.
And how do you feel about this whole process now that you are you're moving towards puberty? You still feel as comfortable with things as you always seem to have?
I'm definitely not as comfortable, but I think I'll be able to get through it and I'll just be able to be a normal girl.
Other than your sort of the phobias about growing facial hair and whatnot, what are your fears going forward?
I'm also scared about getting a deep voice and things like that.
So it's really, your fears are not so much about being accepted by your peers or how the whole, I mean, you're in adolescence, the whole
Well,
dating thing has to come in here. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, actually, I am scared that if I do go through male puberty, that some people will not understand. Like, some of my friends will be like, why are you starting to grow hair and stuff? And I think I might lose friendships, and I really don't want that to happen.
So do most of your friends now